So, hello everybody. I'm very excited to talk with Chaya Czernowin today. Chaya is a composer from Israel and also a professor at Harvard University. She has written many outstanding works, solo pieces, chamber music, orchestral music, and also large-scale opera works, for which she is maybe best known for. She has won numerous prizes, and her music is played by many, many great musicians on a regular basis. Thank you very much for taking the time for this interview, Chaya.
Of course. You're very welcome. With pleasure.
Thank you. Since I'm a Berliner, I would like to start with some questions about your time here in Berlin. And so maybe just, why did you want to come to Berlin in the first place?
You mean when I was young?
Yeah.
Yeah, I came to Berlin when I was 25 years old, or actually 20s. Yeah, I'm somewhere around the age of 25. And I came because I met Dieter Schnebel in Israel. And Dieter then, after our meeting, actually, whoever he met in Israel said that he appreciated my work. And I also, of course, admired his way of thinking and his openness, and just had a very strong feeling about the freedom of his character. And so when it got my time to, when I was done with my master, and I really wanted to get out of Israel to learn to know some other places, my composition teacher, Abel Ehrlich, told me, why won't you write to Schnebel? He would be a fantastic person to work with. And indeed, I called him. At that time, there was no email and no Zoom and nothing like that. I called him and he said, oh yes, please come. And I applied to the DALP for the student fellowship, and I was able to come and study with him and live in Berlin for 2.5 years. At that time, it was the 80s. Berlin was still divided, and it was quite a magical place.
And I recently read that you didn't immediately succeed at the entrance exam. And
I failed.
Yeah.
It's not that I failed at the entrance exam. Yeah.
And maybe that's interesting for young composers who hear this maybe, but what was that experience for you to fail the first time?
Well, you know, I've been always very confident in music, and I never had a failing. So, you know, in all the tests that I had to go through, I had perfect pitch, but very, very good perfect pitch. So I could hear every noise. I could tell you the pitch immediately and so on. So I was not ready for this. Even if I did not always came up first, but it was clear that I belonged to the profession also. And suddenly all these young people got accepted and I did not get accepted. And it was quite a shock. And it was a shock to all my confidence. I think it was very, very good to go through it, because you have to fail sometime. It's important as a kind of an immune. Just, you know, like now we are having the vaccine for Corona. You have to have vaccines for different situations in life. And, but it did affect me very deeply. And I thought for half a year, I couldn't write music. And I thought I should leave music and become a psychologist. Nobody bothered at the time to explain to me that those failings are not always a sign of what you are or what your state is or any indication. In my case, I definitely think that there was something going on, because I wanted to learn composition with Dieter Schnebel, who was not among the people who belonged to the composition program. So I think there was something else going on, that they were maybe not happy that somebody comes from abroad to study with a professor who does not belong to the composition program. You never know what causes a failing. And I'm not here to excuse it. Yeah, maybe they just didn't like my work. But the truth is that afterwards, at one point, my music was at the concert of the composition program, and one of them came to me and said, "Your piece was wonderful." And for me, that was a kind of an apology. and inverbal, But it was very difficult, and it was a failing because, regardless of the reason, I did not pass that exam, and that was a shock to the system.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in Dieter Schnebel because, of course, at the University of Arts in Berlin, many people talk about him, and I was just wondering how it was to study with him and what you learned from him.
It was a curious experience. All my teachers before Schnebel were very extremely highly engaged. So I studied with Abel Ehrlich, who was a fantastic, extremely intelligent and very intuitive person with a crazy sense of humor and crazy in general. And he would really be very direct and tell you exactly what he felt about your piece. And if he didn't like it, he said it and you had to deal with it, which was very, very helpful. Then I studied with Yitzhak Sadai. Both of them are not alive anymore. And Yitzhak Sadai wanted me to tell him every detail why I did it. It was really no freedom there. I had to really have a almost rational explanation for every length, duration, or he could just, point and say, so why this, and why that, and why that? And then came Schnebel, who almost didn't say anything. And him not saying anything left me alone in a new place, in a new universe, in a new life feeling to figure it out myself. When I'm looking back at it, I'm thinking, wow, this is such an amazing present he gave me. Not intervening and not saying. So he would, he would read my piece and then he would be quiet and then he would say, mm-hmm. And then he would say, hmm. And then he would say one sentence, that was always very valuable and I was very provocative, but he would not say a lot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. And now I wanted to talk a bit more about your path as a composer, and I know that when you were a teenager, you played in a progressive rock band, and I was wondering if you think that you got something from that experience that is still relevant for your current work as a composer.
Absolutely. I think that, when I was writing my songs, when I was 14, 15, 16, it was a channel for me to express some very painful things because I was not a happy teenager. I was quite a suffering teenager. And I felt that only music understands me. Mm-hmm. So I think that already there, that kind of channel of being able to express things that are not spoken about, things that are really hard to explain, but being able to approach the music, that started there.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of directness.
Mm-hmm.
It's a directness, touch pain with music.
And at the time, did you also know classical music already, or did you grow up with it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I started playing piano when I was probably 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
5
Okay,
years old, 6 years old. Yeah.
And do you remember maybe when you first came in touch with more modern classical music? I don't know how to call it, but new music, contemporary music. Do you remember when you discovered that?
Well, the truth is that I started with listening to Hindemith, Prokofiev. That was very new for me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but at the time, I used to listen to Gentle Giant, Frank Zappa. So there is Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There was some kind of equivalent in the harmony, or you could find that relationship, But I think that I was and all those things went very deeply. So I really liked. I have to confess, I loved Hindemith. I loved some of Hindemith's music. And I did also love the Prokofiev at the time. That was my bridge. And my music harmonically went that way. It went more and more chromatic. The songs became more and more strange until my friends told me, Chaya, this is not pop music anymore. It's something completely different. You have to go and study, find out what you are doing, Yeah. But I think that it was very important experience to hear Webern for the first time, because that was really music that in some ways stood by itself and could be a very strong visual reference where tonality has waned away. Because in Prokofiev, in Hindemith, you really hear the connection to tonality. Everything is, skewed tonality. But not in Webern anymore, And I'm not talking about the beginning, later. And I was listening and I was thinking, wow, it's so weird. It's like bubbles, closed bubbles. And I was very, very curious about it. And that's, I think, one of the first things that really impressed me. Later, I went to the music academy and I was introduced to ligeti and etc.
Great. So, yeah, now that you mention Webern, I had a question for you. So, I think 2 years ago now, you came to Berlin for your premiere of your opera Heart Chamber, and also came to my university to talk about your music. And I remember that I really liked listening to you and how you described your work. And I don't really know why, but somehow I always remembered one sentence you said, and you said something like, I always tried to be Webern, but I'm Berg.
And it's true. It's so true and so sad, but true.
And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that sentence. Maybe it's a bit silly, but yeah, what you meant or mean by that.
Well, I usually say I was born in Berg, but I would have loved to be Webern. I feel that Berg is a very romantic. He's a very romantic composer, and he's a very, how can I say that, carnivorous. mean, he takes from very different places and he integrates, you know, in Wozzeck you find from folk music to the most abstract music, you know. But it's all extremely passionate, and that passionate feeling that the music exudes really connects it for me to romanticism. Even if it's very abstract, even if it's very highly constructed with the forms and with the exchange between the forms, there is something in the tissue, in the skin, in the flesh of the music, which is really going back to romanticism. Maybe it is the connection to emotionality, that what Berg is detailing are very complex and multi-layered emotional states and emotional processes. And yeah, while the treatment is very different from a romantic treatment, and it's really not naive by any means, but it is still with roots in romanticism. And in that sense, in the sense of being so connected to one's work in that way, through the vein of emotionality, I feel that I was born in Bergen. Whereas Webern's quality comes from his ability to abstract. And even if I'm not saying that Webern's music is not emotional, it can be very emotionally affecting, but almost as a memory, as a hint, as an aftertaste, because the body of the music is not concerned with emotionality, concerned with crystallization of structures. It is highly visual and it is highly abstract. And that's why. And I would have liked, you know, one always, maybe not everybody, but in my case, I would always like to possess what I do not have naturally.
Yeah.
So if emotionality is my normal channel, I would like to, or I always admire people who spoke like, you know, from Star Trek. They are very detached, they have their peace, and it's not always rational, but it is abstract, much colder, much more distant. Distant is something that I would have loved to possess, but I'm unable to. I'm always very close. Nothing to do about it. But I keep trying.
Yeah, well, I don't know. For me, I think I'm also more on the emotional side, but somehow Webern of the three of the Viennese school always was the closest to me and spoke most directly to me. But yeah, of course, I like Berg also. But now that we mentioned heart chamber, I had a few questions about that too. So it was the first time that you wrote the text yourself for your opera, and yeah, I was wondering if how that experience was, and if now you think that you want to do it again, or if it was so difficult that you don't want to do it again. And yeah.
I will start from your last question. I cannot say if I will do it again or not. It was really a very functional move on my part. It was very, the decision to do it came from what my piece needed. So, you know, if you have a beautiful text, which is provocative, which needs music, because you would not compose to a text which is all closed up, because it doesn't need music. if I choose a text, usually it's text that allows me to get in and bring another view. So if you take such a text, then it really dedicates the music quite a bit. You know, you can bring, you can even go against the text, but even going against the text is dedicated by the text. I needed the music to speak. I really did not want a text that would force my music to be this way or that way. On the other hand, I didn't want to do it just in music because I wanted to give people some links, some strings to hold so that they can follow my thinking, because my thinking about this piece was extremely complex. And I actually did not want to leave it too ambiguous. It is ambiguous, but I didn't want it to be so ambiguous that, you know, it can float. I wanted to commit to a family of meanings through the text so that I can at least designate the field of thinking that they had.
Yeah, I remember the opera being very direct and concrete, and that seemed very courageous to me. And maybe now that we spoke about Berg and Webern and so on, I remember that I felt maybe a connection between the stage works of Berg and also Schönberg with that directness and this power of expression. Is that something that is close to you also, or I mean the operas of Berg and Schönberg and so on?
Well, I mean, for me, Wozzeck has been always an extremely close companion, as well as Moses and Aaron. And when I was young, I listened for, I would say, half a year to Gure Lieder of Schoenberg. But, you know, I'm not sure that I would necessarily associate myself with this lineage. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe now I remember that the first piece of yours that I discovered was your string quartet, and now recently I listened to another piece of yours, a more recent piece, Hidden, which is also hidden.
Which one?
Hidden for string quartet.
Hidden,
and
yeah.
Hidden, yeah. And I was just curious how you yourself would describe your evolution as a composer from that first string quartet to Hidden or to now.
It's almost hard to believe it's the same person, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The string quartet was written in 95, and I was in my 30s, in the end of my 30s. And it was a time in which I really had to figure out how things work. I really did not want to create music that flows, that goes, that does something. I wanted to create music in order to understand what is working. Why does something sound like a beginning, middle, end? How does one combine things together? Things that do not belong, that belong. And the string quartet came from all these inquiries. Another inquiry in that sense was, what creates an instrument? Can I have an instrument which is the whole string quartet? What kind of instrument can I make it? Can I make it into a totally different instrument? In that case, a very primitive one. yeah, the string quartet becomes like a very primitive instrument. And so that was a time of figuring out, of not wanting to create an experience that is a new experience, but rather an experience which is revelatory from reality, taking reality apart, understanding reality anew. And yeah, I think this was in the 90s, very important for me. The first decades around the time of the 21st century, I think that I've been really wanting to change from that way, from that demeanor. And I used to just feel like it's really hard to listen to my music. And one time I had a radio program where they played for 3 hours a lot of my work. It was actually in the middle, even closer to the end of 2007 or so. And I came out of there and I said to myself, enough. We have to do something different. I have to leave that arena where I'm trying and changing, and I have to start letting things move. So in this continuum between your intervention, the Beethovenian way of working, I intervene because I want to surprise, I intervene because I want to assert, I intervene because I want to really leave my dent on reality, between that part to the part which is Feldman, maybe, of I'm just looking at what's going on. It's going on, I just have to get that, not intervene, and that this is a continuum. I don't see them as oppositions. I see them as a field in which one can move. And hidden is actually in one side of the continuum of really looking at something which is moving. Even though I couldn't hold myself, and in the middle I'm intervening. It's a very strong part of in hidden. And that's when the piece gets into trouble, because it's suddenly not just flowing, but it's suddenly somebody is doing something. But that's the depth of the piece. So that search of creating experiences which have a kind of experiential depth to them has to do with getting into trouble, where you are not just one thing or another thing and your field is clear, but when your original premise is breached, and you have to deal with it in the piece. That's when the piece can really teach you something.
And so, when you write a piece for such a for a string quartet, or you write an opera which has such a big tradition, how is your process? Do you look a lot at, let's say, string quartet pieces or operas, or do you not want to see any of these while you're doing your own? How is that relationship?
It's different from one thing to another, you know.
Yeah.
In terms of the string quartet, actually, when I was at UCSD in San Diego as a doctoral student, I dedicated the whole year to study string quartets with Brian Fermihan, who was, you know, he was one of my mentors for my qualifying exam, and that was our subject together. So I did look at a lot of string quartet. In terms of operas, I immediately knew when I wrote my first opera that I wanted to do something very different than the tradition. Yeah.
Another question I had was that opera is, of course, a very collaborative work, and you have to work with many different people, and I was wondering if that's something that's natural to you, or is it difficult to maybe make compromises and exchange ideas and so on?
Oh, I always just write my music, so I don't need to compromise at all. But I do have this kind of something that I feel is almost like an ethics that if I choose a director to work with, I would like to give them the same freedom that I give myself.
Yeah.
So I do not feel it is compromise, and I'm very clear of the fact that I'm a composer. Sometimes I wish to be a director, but I don't have the 10,000 hours of dealing with being a director. So I have to allow them to take on, but I can comment, I can help, and I can also direct slightly. For example, in our chamber, it was very clear to me that they want a video. So I can give a kind of a general direction from the visual or the stage, but I would not, if the director wants something and I want something else, I let them win in the end. If I cannot convince them, they have to win because it's their production. So it's not exactly a compromise, because I wrote my work and it's not compromise. And they should do their work and not compromise with me. And I love I've been so lucky so far that most of my productions, actually quite many productions of my operas, and I always found fantastic people who were open, and even if at times there were people who were hostile, at the end of the process, they became very loyal friends. So that is, I love working with people, and I'm not naive to think that everybody loves, everything that happens, and it's not a kumbaya. It's sometimes pretty difficult, when the cellist in the meeting, as soon as the rehearsal ends, the next second they start playing Bach, as if they couldn't breathe and now they can breathe. But exactly that cellist became a very good, became a very good new music cellist later. That was the first. So no, it's not always easy. And actually with orchestra, sometimes when I was younger, it was extremely difficult for me. Like in the piece Mine in Berlin, I had some of my hardest experiences. People really telling me very humiliating things and not being friendly at all and not becoming friends either. But look, we are asking players to do things they are not used to do. You have to be very aware that you are doing that. So you have to acknowledge that. It's difficult when there is no communication. But if there is even a chance for communication, you should try and walk the extra mile. And I have tried to walk the extra mile, explaining a lot, being extremely friendly in the sense of empathy, understanding that it's not easy. If they learn all their life to be very brilliant, and I'm asking to do something which is totally different. It demands actually a different kind of virtuosity, which is not considered virtuosity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember in Hard Chamber, I really liked how the stage turned and how all the people walked in slow motion. That worked really well. I really liked that. And maybe to come slowly to an end, let's talk about your next piece that is premiered in Donaueschingen soon. I heard that it's explicitly a political work, and So maybe can you tell us what it's about, and maybe what's the difficulties for you to write political music?
You know, I don't want music music for me cannot be a messenger for political cause and only in service of a political cause. That is not what I do somehow. But because of the pandemic, I was thinking to write, I was given the opportunity to write for this Südwestrundfunk vocal solisten and for the Jack Quartet, whom I know so well. And I wanted to write a piece, a very large piece, which would deal with very painful and very complex emotions. And through that engagement, to really think about the subject that really is important for me for years, about how an emotion comes into music. How does music convey an emotion? How can I convey? I actually thought it will be very methodological musicalizing of emotions. But when I started writing that piece, it was around the time when there was the murder of George Floyd. So I had a huge plan for, you know, dealing with that story, like five things. But at the end, I started with the murder of George Floyd, and that's where I stayed. Because what happened to me was that I kind of started getting much deeper and deeper and deeper into kind of a forest of, I would say, a forest of deep anger that actually did not let me go and continue and just move to another thing. And so I had this 55 minutes long piece, where we slowly get very, very cautiously, but we get to a place where I feel that the music becomes like a swamp of anger. And that's the anger, I think, that accumulated during this time of the pandemic, with all the news, with understanding deeper and deeper the situation of people here, the African American situation in this country, in the US. And I was not born here, but I've lived a long time here. And it suddenly became so unbearable to when you just thought about how they live every day and how they deal with.
Yeah, well, it sounds very interesting, and I hope to hear it. I will try to come and listen to
it. The 14th of September, it will open the festival. So
yeah, I will definitely try. Thank you so much for talking to me. It was very interesting for me, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you as well.